All right. So Lynda owns Successfully Speaking. She's a communications expert and a very good friend. And Larry, her husband's a good friend as well. I don't want to leave Larry out of that. So Lynda, if you could please take us through this, it's all yours.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. And I was in last week's webinar, Chris, so I'd love to continue the conversation about what we can do with our soft skills, since I'm a soft skills specialist. I'd like to talk about listening with compassion. And the first thing that I talk about is helping people elevate their listening skills. We often speak about our speaking skills and how we can be better speakers. And I think we're missing the boat if we don't talk about listening. Those of you who know me know that I talk a lot about the 3 V's of communication: the visual, how you look; the vocal, how you sound; and the verbal, what you say. And we think about this a lot when we're talking, and we're going to have to think about it even more when we're working virtually. Maybe we're just using a telephone, so there is no visual, and our vocal will become more important. Maybe we're using both the visual with the camera, so we have to think about how are we coming across visually. So those are ways that we send out information. But as we know, communication is a back and forth process. And so as much as you may be judging me by how I look, how I sound, and what I say, I'm judging my communication partner. And so I'm watching all of these things. And that's where the OLE approach to communication comes about. And I teach this. And that is, as you look inside the gear, observe. So observe what they look like. Listen to what they say, and that allows you to engage. And a perfect example of this would be is, Chris, if I called you and I said, "How are you doing, Chris?" And you say, "I'm okay." Well, your words said you were okay, but if I don't pay attention to how you look and how you sound, I'm not being a good listener or observer. And so that's what I'd like to take you through today and talk about what are the different ways that we can listen when we're with our communication partners, be it our boss, our colleague, our children, our spouse, our significant other, or whoever else it might be. So I know many of you have seen this quote on the next slide, and I bet if I asked everybody to raise their hand, if this is them, most of the people are going to respond that most of us do not listen with the intent to understand the speaker. We listen with the intent to reply. We're always thinking about what are we going to say, and we miss what the other person is telling us. And we have to really think about this now when people have a lot going on in their heads that when they're talking, we have to wait and listen to them. So how do we go about this? What's important with listening? And the first thing, Chris, if we want to move forward, is you don't have to answer this in the chat box, but I want you to think about this today, and I want you to think about this moving forward. What does listening mean to you? And why is it important when we're dealing with people? And let's move to the next one. Next slide, Chris. First, we have to decide what is that difference between hearing and listening. We can all, unless we have a hearing loss, we can hear things. Hearing, if you can click on the next slide, hearing is the physical act, detecting sounds. I hear the noise in the background. I hear my husband talking. I hear him. But am I listening to him? Because listening is intellectual. Listening is emotional. We need to understand and interpret not just that verbal, but the nonverbal. And that's where it's going to be very important during these times. We're not sitting in the same room with them. So turn on your webcams so we can communicate more effectively. And I can read your body language. I can see your facial expression, and it helps me become a better listener. Now, there are so many different types of listening. I'm not going to go into each type. And Chris, I know we're going to send a handout that has this information on it, so you'll get this afterwards. There are different types of listening, but what I'd like to focus on are 3 main types: active listening, empathetic, and compassionate. And let's talk a little bit about active. I'm sure everybody has heard about active listening. That's one of the soft skills we're supposed to have. It's listening to that complete message, both the verbal and nonverbal, and it's focused. But active listening is not the listening we want. We hear it all the time, but there's a problem with active listening. Active listening can be faked. I can pretend as Lou, maybe you're talking to me and I'm shaking my head and I'm nodding and I'm saying, uh-huh, I get it. But I could be sending emails to somebody else at the same time. I can fake active listening. So even though we use that term, we need to go deeper. Empathetic listening gets into the speaker's movie. And what I mean by that is they're getting their perspective. I may think that what Ron is saying doesn't make any sense at all, but that's his perspective. That's his movie. I have to get into his reality and interpret what he's saying from his perspective, somewhat like just stepping into somebody else's shoes. That's empathetic. But with colleagues, I've spoken about it and I realized, and this is before everything's gone on with the pandemic, compassionate goes even deeper. Compassionate is listening without any judgment, allowing somebody to speak and not feeling the need that I have to say, oh yes, I feel that way too, or yeah, that happened to me, or you wouldn't believe what happened to me. That's not compassion. Compassion is let that person talk, sit back, give them all the space, and you're very engaged. And we're giving a gift to somebody by doing that. That's the listening we may need to do in the coming weeks when we're working with people. So we'd like to do our first breakout. And in this breakout, what I'd like you to discuss with your group is, what does it feel like when your communication partner, be it your coworker, your spouse, your child, your friend, does it feel like when they're a poor listener? And what does it take to be a good listener? What are things you can do to show them that you're a good listener? And then I'll send it over to you, Chris or Keith, so we can break out into those groups. There's a wonderful Chinese symbol. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but it's a symbol for active listening, which, as you know, I think it goes deeper than that. But this does go deeper than that, because if you know, with Chinese symbols, each part means something for the whole word. You need your ears to hear. You need your eyes to see. That's that ole I spoke about. You need undivided attention to focus on your listener. But to me, where the compassion and empathy comes in is you need to use your mind to think about what they're saying. And most importantly, use your heart so that you can feel their emotions. And to me, that's the quintessent listener. If you can do all of these things, and we should strive to do that every time we're speaking with somebody and listening to somebody. So there are barriers though, right? Things happen. We have our personal agendas. There's the noise in the background. There's maybe I feel intimidated by the status, or I don't think that person is prestigious enough, and so I stop listening. Gender, race, and age speak for themselves. Maybe their physical appearance is a distraction and they lose their credibility. Maybe I had such a bad situation with that person before, whatever he says or she says, I'm not going to listen to. And again, what is my relationship with that speaker? All of these become barriers that would prevent us from being a good listener. What are the things we can do? And I'm not talking about how to fake it, but just be ready and motivated to listen. Give that person your undivided attention. Read their nonverbal, which means not just how they look, but how they sound. What else are they communicating besides the words they're using? I'm okay may sound good, but read the nonverbal. Listen to what they're saying, interpret it, show some empathy, and try to withhold any judgment and let them talk. And most of all, know what your filters are. We all have our own filters. Know what they are so that you can monitor them and say, okay, let's put that aside. I'm not going to judge that person. I'm going to listen to them. And with all of those, you're going to enhance and elevate your listening skills. So my challenge for you is, what are you going to do differently from this brief conversation we had? I'd be happy to speak to you more after this, or if you have any questions, but hopefully this gave you some ideas on a few things you can do differently and move forward from here and become a more compassionate listener.